Good to see everyone. Assalamu alaikum, blessings of peace, and
Assalamualaikum.
Eid Mubarak. So it'll be a blessed Eid. So this is the days of Eid that follow the month of Ramadan, and we'll get into a little bit into what I'm going to share. But I'm going to start off with a song that I hope will sort of set the mood for us. So I'm going to share my screen. Right. So I mean, I've always liked this song, and it really sets the sort of mood and the the rationale for the month of Ramadan and what's coming forth here. There's a lot of reconnection with the Creator, with God, with Allah, and there's a lot of praise worship. So this sort of contemporary song really is very apropos to what people are engaging in traditional forms, but this is a sort of a modern take of it from an Islamic lens. Um, and so one of the things that we're told through the Quran is that worship is God and it's for remembering God, and that there's healing in that, that there's sustenance in that for human beings, that we were created to need this connection. And so that's what happens during Ramadan and during Eid here. So I'll do sort of a quick recap of Ramadan because I think these days are sort of all interconnected, their purpose, their rationale, what's going on at this time. So Ramadan is the ninth month of the Islamic calendar. It's important for several reasons, but probably the paramount, most important reason is it's the month that the revelation of the Quran started to be received by the Prophet Muhammad in 610 of the Common Era. And this whole period of time, this 29 or 30 days, lunar months are 29 or 30 days long. This period of time, um, and I think the people in this room understand that there are places and there are times where the proximity between the earthly realm and the spiritual realm is close. It's thin. There's different types of words that we use. So in the Islamic tradition, the month of Ramadan, the spiritual world and the earthly world are very closely in proximity to each other. And so there's heightened awareness of this and hopes around that time. And so what it means is, I think mostly that we know is about fasting, fasting from dawn, so that's first light to sunset, um, every day of that month, and to reconnect or connect more deeply with the text of the Quran and its guidance, to try to things that are sort of allowable, like eating, drinking, intimate relations with our spouse, those things become prohibited during the day. And then the things that should be prohibited from us generally, backbiting, lying, stealing, those things like that, those become sort of hyper prohibited, if you want to think of it in a way. And so if somebody is not eating and drinking or smoking or having intimate relations, but they're being a jerk, that that's not the point of Ramadan, right? If you are sort of an aggressive driver, this is your chance to like reform your driving skills. If you are a overlord of a boss, if you are a parent who's short with their children, like all the different types of ways that we come up short in our relationship, horizontal relationship with other parts of humanity, this is a chance to realign with that. So there's a spiritual cleansing that happens. There's an understanding that if we engage in sincere worship and sincere repentance, that this is a chance to start anew. And that by starting anew, you can sort of leave behind the guilt or the shame or the distance from what that really creates is when we feel those things, we feel not we're not worthy to be in relationship with our creator, we grow distant. And that's the real tragedy of the situation. That we human beings sometimes put mental lim our we put our mental limits on God's mercy. We're like, we're not worthy. God couldn't forgive this. I know this secret thing that I've done. Um, and over again in the Quran, we're told that God is most merciful, most beneficent. And maybe it's a challenge for us to really believe and accept that. So one of the spiritual understandings at this time is that so in all times, people do things, let's say either good things or quote unquote bad things, and that's their agency. And the bad things that people do, the lying or whatever they're doing, it might come from their own sort of tarnished heart, or it could come from sort of whisperings to our hearts from negative forces. You want to call them demonic forces, satanic forces, negative forces, whatever terminology makes sense to you. Um, those forces don't control you, but they can sort of influence you or convince you to do something. Or not convince is even a strong word, suggest, influence. So during Ramadan, what's understood is those negative forces are are sort of locked away. And so what the result is when we see bad behavior from ourselves or shortcomings from ourselves during this month, it's an annual self-check on the state of your heart. So if you can't blame it on somebody else, you can't blame it on a negative force. This is where the state of your heart is. And that's not necessarily to get depressed about. That's sort of to do a self-check. You guys want to remember back in school, like at the beginning of a unit of something, you might have like a pretest or a self-check or something like that to see where you are at. And at the end of the term, you might have a exam to see how much progress you made. Well, here, this is sort of a spiritual self-check time. Um, so that's sort of some of the spiritual understandings of it. Some of the nuts and bolts are Ramadan starts with the new moon. What that means different things to different parts of the Muslim community. So historically, the way you knew a new lunar month started is you would see the thin crescent of that month. Um, this is in times when before light pollution and people were used to being stargazers. In modern times, many people use, and now we have sophisticated astronomical calculations to figure these things out. But in the Islamic tradition, in the Islamic community, there's sort of a healthy debate right now. There's two ways. Some people say that there is some wisdom and benefit to going out and doing a moon sighting. And so we should start our fasting. We should start the next lunar month when you see the moon sighting, regardless of whether you can calculate it or not. This is what the Prophet did. This is what we should emulate. And other people say that, while we understand that God has unveiled parts of his universe, we now have advanced mathematics and astronomy, and we can calculate where the moon is going to be in relation to the Earth decades in advance now. So we can be more accurate, we can plan ahead, we can plan for school calendars and things like that. And so those are the two things. So if you hear people saying, oh, there's one mosque that did Eid today, there's another that's doing it tomorrow, that's sort of what is transpiring. People are using different interpretations of the tradition, of the scripture. And I think there really is, personally, I think there's beauty in both. Last night, some of the schools I'm at, the text threads blew up because a lot of the work surrounding masjids were doing Eid today, but then word was getting around that no, Eid is on Monday, and most people aren't aware of these subtle differences. So this morning I had to write like a lengthy text note to the students saying there's two methods, they're both fine. You can choose whichever one feels comfortable with you. But there's no need to like argue or put down about it. These are two valid ways to interpret these things. Um, And that's one of the biggest things I find with not just students, but people in general, that our traditions are deep and broad enough, but a lot of times we've only grown up in a version of our faith tradition, and we're unaware about the way our tradition can handle difference, at the same time without saying one is wrong, one is right. You can have two valid ways to go for it. So today, a lot of places in the United States held Eid prayers this morning. Some places will do tomorrow morning. Even here in the Philadelphia area, it was probably 80% did it today, but 20% may do it tomorrow. And
Asheq,
yeah.
can you click on your slides on the left because they're not changing?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Got it.
Thanks.
I'll just keep it here. Um, So I always like this. This gets updated every year, but it really shows you in sort of in a visual form how the month of Ramadan rotates around relative to the Gregorian calendar, right? So a lunar year is about 10 days shorter than a solar year. And so every year it's going to roll back 10 days or so. Um, so in a couple of years, it's going to be in December, and then it'll take a couple of decades later, it'll be back in June. And, over a lifetime, if you live 33 years or 66 years, you will experience Ramadan through the entire calendar year. Um, and all of these things, I think, this rotation, the sighting of the moon, these types of things are I would say are gifts in the Islamic tradition that help us reconnect with God's creation. Lots of times in the Quran mentions God created the heavens and the earth, the moon and the sun and the stars, and they move in orchestrated movements, and there is wisdom in that for those who ponder. Like this is a way to understand God's creation and to be in awe of it and to be reconnected to it. Um, so that's something to be aware of. I saw this recently and I thought this was fun that at any given time, Muslims somewhere are waking up to their breakfast meal and starting their prayer or their fasting, and at some other place on the opposite side of the globe, they're concluding that day of fasting. Um, so this was kind of fun that this graphic showed sort of places on opposite sides of the earth, what their timing was, how long they were fasting, and a little cultural, anecdote about what they might have as food for those meals. Um, so I got a kick out of that. So I thought I would share that while I know this in my head that this is happening, somebody is praying, somebody's eating, somebody's starting their fast, somebody's breaking their fast. Um, Seeing it in this fashion kind of reminded me about sort of the continuity of this practice around the globe. So, as I mentioned, it's fasting from dawn to sunset, no eating, drinking, smoking, or intimate relations, but also things that break the fast or have becoming angry or lying or any kind of unethical behavior. But otherwise, Muslims are encouraged to continue with their work, their school, their other obligations as usual. It's not a time to like check out of life for like 30 days. That's part of the challenge that you continue with your obligations and you add on these opportunities for worship, both communal worship and personal worship. It's really a time to connect vertically with God alone. There's a practice called itikaf, in the Arabic, which sort of means seclusion. And people sometimes will do it at the mosque. You might see somebody in the corner of the mosque sitting there by themselves for like 24 hours. Um, that you could do it at home. If you have a home where you can get away from it all. Some people don't have just have a too busy a home. But that's part of they encourage practice. It's not a requirement, but to take time for personal reflection. Um, and there's also this communal aspect of it. So, all of our traditions have lots of rituals. I think the most famous ritual in the Islamic tradition are the daily prayers. Lots of studies have shown about half of people, both here in the United States and globally, take part in the daily prayers regularly. But over 80% of Muslims globally and in America take part in the daily fasting of Ramadan. It is on campus, it's when everybody shows up. Like, as an organizer on campus, you're trying to like get people to come to events and different types of things, and you get sort of some turnout, but Ramadan is where you see everybody coming out and partaking, and you see the full size of the community. So those are some of the required things, but some of the extra things, there's a whole set of extra prayers that are very are encouraged. They're not required, but they're encouraged. These often take place at night. And these can be as short as like 5 minutes. Oftentimes they're done communally, and people will recite 1/30th of the Quran every night. And so by the end of the month, you've recited the entire text together. Um, so that's a really bonding communal activity. And at Swarthmore this year, we're fortunate one of our first year students has memorized the Quran before he came to Swarthmore. And so he volunteered to help lead that. So every night he would lead any students that would come. He would get 2 or 3 students to come most nights, sometimes 5, and they would recite 1/30th of it together. So they just completed that. Takes anywhere from 75 minutes to about 2 hours to recite 1/30th of the Quran. Be about 20 pages or so. And you're reciting it in a rhythmic manner, right? A lot of times we did this at Haverford College also with a trained scholar, a trained reciter, and he would take a break halfway through and do sort of like a little bit of a text study just to share what are some of the insights into what we're reciting. This is also a time for fresh start. People are really trying to up their spiritual game, if we want to use that terminology. And it's increased time of service and especially charity. So Muslim organizations, whether it's your local mosque, a food charity, civil rights organizations, they're getting like 75, 80, 85% of their donations during this 30-day period. So for them, it's make or break time as an organization. So I wanted to show this. This is a little clip of those nightly prayers I was talking about, where they're reciting 1/30th of the Quran together. And this happened about a couple years ago. I thought it's a humorous but beautiful episode of what happens. Whoops.
Do you have the original sound for musicians button on in your top right?
Top right. No.
Oh, I'm not seeing it there.
Do
Hmm.
I?
We couldn't hear the last video very well.
Oh. Hmm. Let me see how this one works here. إن تتبعون إلا الظن وإن أنتم إلا تخرصون قل فلله الحجة البالغة فلو شاء لهداكم أجمعين الله. So it is funny, definitely to watch the cat jump up there and hang out. Um, but there's humor in it, but there's some softness and beauty in it too. So I wanted to share that. People often ask, like some of these practices sound like they could be demanding. What about this situation? What about that person? What about this? So Not surprisingly, fasting is not meant to be something that's traumatic or difficult. Um, so all kinds of people are exempt. If you're sick, if you're pregnant, if you're traveling, my in-laws just flew in from Turkey 2 days ago, and while they were flying, they didn't fast. So people will make their fast later on if they're able. And if they are not able, so like my mom's a breast cancer survivor, she can't fast anymore because she has to take certain medicines a couple times a day. She will feed people who need a meal. So that's another way to do that. Like I said, so there's these compensatory measures. And so, yeah, a typical day is waking up in the morning, having an early morning meal, fasting and doing your own work, and then breaking the fast. There's sort of a little difference of opinion between Sunni scholars and Shia scholars of what the end of the Islamic day is. There's about a 20-minute difference. And then there's these Taraweeh prayers or Qiyamul Layls, these late nightly extra prayers that happen. So the last thing I wanted to share quickly, I'm not going to share the whole video, but just to show this is what we sort of experienced during Eid today, this amazing diversity of cultures, languages, foods that happen after the prayer. So people assemble for morning prayers. Um, the place I went to, they did it at 8:30 in the morning. We did it in the auxiliary building at St. Luke's Methodist in Bryn Mawr. Um, the masjid community in Valley Forge, they sort of have grown. So they rented space at the Sheraton in King of Prussia, and they did back to back to back services in the morning, I think 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And then afterwards, people will sort of gather, well wishes, have a snack. And so I'll play like a minute or so.
Where is your spouse from?
She's from Palestine.
And he's from Pakistan. I'm from Bangladesh.
And I'm from Nigeria.
He's from Baghdad, Iraq.
And she's from Jacksonville, Florida, Gatorland.
I'm from Pakistan originally, and my wife, she's from Cleveland. She's an Afro-American.
He's from Egypt.
She's from Pakistan.
My spouse is from.
So it gives you a little idea. Like there's an amazing diversity of people, cultures that happen during the balance of the day. People are sort of bouncing around from house to house. So we've been hosting, and we've had family from New Jersey come. We've had my parents come by. I also reach out to students at some of the schools I work at who either can't go home because home is far away, or they're international students and it just doesn't make sense to go home. And so it's kind of to give them a little bit of a piece of home away from home type of thing. So we've had a couple of them stop by during the day. And yeah, it's mostly well-wishing, catching up with friends. It's supposed to be a day of joy. A lot of mosques nowadays will have sort of like bouncy castles and carnivals for like the little kids. Um, Oftentimes kids and sometimes even teenagers will get like gifts and things on this day. And so it's supposed to be a joyous day, a day of community and of well-wishing and getting together. So that's sort of what I had to share. I know we're at time. If people had any thoughts, comments, questions, happy to try to share or answer anything that comes to mind.